Let's get more on this now with Dr. Conor McKeown, who is a lecturer in digital media at the University of Stirling here in the UK. Thanks so much for being with us today. So Brazil's banning of X is extreme, but in general, is fake news and information more prevalent on social media than, say, 5 years ago?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that there's a lot of stuff that we have to compete with these days that didn't exist 5 years ago. There are bots and artificial intelligences now generating huge amounts of fake news and disinformation and misinformation. There are bad actors from countries all around the world attempting to influence people's citizenry. So, yeah, there's a war being fought online right now. And disinformation and misinformation is a huge part of that, and coming up with answers on how to stop that or even curb it is extremely difficult.
Extremely difficult and extremely dangerous, isn't it? This uncontrolled fake news on social media, especially when there are so many key elections happening around the world.
Extremely difficult, extremely dangerous. But I think it represents huge opportunities as well for places like traditional news outlets. People are now starting to return to traditional news outlets because they can actually put their faith into the kind of curation that goes on there. It's, I think, returning some faith back into the educational process and making people more critical of the information that they consume largely. I think there's a real awareness growing that the information you receive is maybe not worth trusting on face value and requires a bit more digging. And I'm glad to see that.
So greater awareness now. What about the legislation? Is that catching up, the rules and regulations that police social media and rooting out hate speech and disinformation? You know, how much do lawmakers have to do to catch up with that and really tighten up the rules?
Well, I think the case that we saw in Brazil is really interesting in that regard, in terms of how we can make laws to police social media and information that's out there. Mainly because what happened in Brazil was a reaction against Elon Musk attempting to do his very best to ignore what a court had ordered them to do. So the decision to ban X in Brazil is not a case of banning social media because of the content that was on it. It's banning a social media platform because that social media platform was not willing to cooperate with the government of that country to follow the laws of that country. And we've seen in the United States, we've seen in even years ago in the case of Snapchat had to go through a hugely onerous process of working with the governments of the government agencies in the United States to make sure that they had sufficient protections in place for information going through their network. The UK has had very controversial rules, but I think in some places rules that are helping to protect the citizens from things like disinformation. So we are seeing a very difficult uphill struggle to try and police the way information is put onto these social media platforms. But if companies are willing to see themselves as companies and not to try and overrule and see themselves as private entities that overrule the laws of the countries that they're based within, like Elon Musk is trying to do, then I think that we are on somewhat safe ground as long as that cooperation and discourse and dialogue continues.
Very interesting. Conor, thank you very much indeed for sharing your expertise with us today on this really important matter. This is Dr. Conor McKeown from the University of Stirling joining us. Thanks.